The evening light slipped through the blinds of the small brick house on Willow Street, cutting narrow golden shapes across the hardwood floor. It should have been a peaceful scene. An old man asleep in his recliner, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the quiet rhythm of a neighborhood settling down for the night. But inside that home, buried between the creaking walls and the smell of lavender cleaning spray, lay a truth no one had dared to imagine. A truth that would one day be exposed piece by devastating piece. On that warm evening in late spring, 78-year-old Harold Merriman lay drifting in and out of shallow sleep, unaware that his world was already slipping from his grasp. His daughter, Linda, moved silently around the living room, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. She adjusted his blanket, checked his medication tray, and paused to look at him with a softness anyone else would have mistaken for devotion. Anyone else would have believed she was the perfect caregiver, dutiful, attentive, and endlessly patient. But the shadows in that house told a different story. For years, whispers had circulated between cousins, neighbors, and even an old family friend who noticed something was off. Too many closed doors, too many financial decisions made in silence, too many sudden changes in Harold's routines. But whenever someone tried to get close, whenever someone asked a little too many questions, Linda would smile and say, "He's getting older. He just needs rest." And for a long time, everyone accepted that. Tonight, however, a single letter waited on the edge of Harold's side table, a thin white envelope that would change everything once it was opened. It had arrived earlier in the day, addressed not to Linda, but directly to Harold. It was from the county probate office, and inside was a notice that his financial accounts he believed were untouched, showed major irregularities, overdrafts, missing funds, withdrawals he never authorized, transactions he couldn't have made. That envelope was the moment the silence around this family began to crack. Before Linda could intercept it, before she could find a way to hide yet another truth, Harold reached for it with trembling fingers. The edges shook as he slid the letter free. He read the first few lines, then let the paper fall into his lap. Even in his frailty, the confusion in his eyes cut through the room like cold air. He knew, on some level he knew. But betrayal this deep doesn't reveal itself all at once. It begins with a flicker of doubt, a faint tremble in the lungs, a whisper of something terribly wrong happening just out of sight. And in families like the Merrimans, families built on old traditions, quiet expectations, and years of unspoken wounds, secrets do not fade, they rot. Before we continue, I'd like to know something from you watching tonight. In moments like this, moments where loyalty is tested and trust begins to crumble, who do you believe people protect first? Their family, their pride, or themselves? Share your perspective in the comments, and if this story compels you to dig deeper into the unseen corners of family life, consider supporting the channel so we can continue bringing these hidden truths to light. For the Merriman family, the unraveling began long before that letter arrived. To understand the weight of what would soon be exposed, we must step back, far back into the world they once believed was safe, long before greed, fear, and desperation turned a daughter into something else entirely. Harold Merriman spent almost his entire life in the same city, tucked somewhere between quiet suburbs and the growing sprawl surrounding Los Angeles. He was a retired building inspector, a meticulous man known for double-checking everything from roofing permits to the alignment of street signs. He had a reputation for fairness, sharp memory, and a personal pride that refused shortcuts. People trusted him, and in turn, he trusted the world more than he should have. His wife, Rosemary, passed away when he was 62. Her death left a hollow space that nothing could fill. Friends noticed him withdraw. Sunday dinners stopped. Holidays grew quiet. And in that vacuum of grief, the one person who stepped in was his daughter, his only child, 42-year-old Linda Merriman. To anyone on the outside, Linda appeared to be the perfect daughter, a soft-spoken woman who worked part-time as a home aide, devoted to caring for elderly clients. She was the kind of person neighbors described as helpful, quiet, or a bit stressed, but always polite. But behind that calm surface lived a tangle of financial struggles, loneliness, and a growing resentment she hid deep beneath obedience. When Harold's health began to decline, Linda moved into his home temporarily to help manage his medications and appointments. No one questioned it. She was, after all, the dutiful child. At first, her involvement seemed innocent, picking up prescriptions, handling grocery lists, keeping track of doctor visits. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, She began controlling more aspects of Harold's life. She managed his mail, arranged his finances for convenience, and convinced him to consolidate accounts so she could keep everything straightforward. She even spoke to his doctors about obtaining power of attorney, explaining that Harold's memory wasn't what it used to be. And allegedly, according to later reports, this was where the manipulation began. The first withdrawals were small, things that Harold might have forgotten he approved, a few $100s at a time. Purchases that could be rationalized as home supplies or medical needs. But as the years went by, the amounts grew. 500, 1,200, 6,000. Money quietly slipped through channels Harold didn't have the strength to monitor. By the third year, Linda was allegedly using her father's accounts to pay off credit cards, car repairs, and even a short-lived business venture she never disclosed to anyone. Still, the family suspected nothing, not yet. Harold trusted his daughter deeply. He believed she would never take advantage of him. And for a long time, he assumed any missing funds were just mistakes, bank errors, automatic payments he forgot about, or medical expenses he couldn't recall. Age, after all, plays tricks on memory. But there were hints, small moments when the truth nearly surfaced. One afternoon, Harold's neighbor, Jim Carver, noticed an unfamiliar truck in the driveway. When he casually asked about the contractors working on the house, Linda dismissed it with a smile, saying they were just fixing a leak. But months later, Jim realized no leak had ever been repaired. The men were hauling boxes, boxes filled with Harold's old tools and collectibles, items Linda allegedly sold online for thousands. Then came the canceled insurance policies, the missing bonds, the sudden change in Harold's will, something Linda insisted was necessary for legal reasons. Looking back, those closest to the family would recall those moments with a shiver. But at the time, the truth stayed buried. It wasn't until Harold's mental clarity began to return, briefly, unexpectedly, during a medication adjustment, that he started asking questions. Serious questions. Questions Linda couldn't answer without exposing herself. And that is when the tension inside the Merriman home grew thick enough to choke on. In those final months before everything collapsed, Harold began keeping notes. Small scribbles in a spiral-bound notebook he hid inside an old shoebox beneath his bed. He wrote down dates, amounts, and things he overheard. He wrote about conversations where Linda seemed nervous, evasive, or strangely controlling. And according to one later witness statement, he even confided to a visiting nurse that something felt wrong. "I think someone's been taking things," he allegedly whispered, "but I'm not sure who." The nurse gently pressed him for details, but he shook his head, afraid of naming the one person he depended on most, afraid of what it might mean if he was right. Because once a truth like that is spoken aloud, there is no going back. Harold's scribbled notebook, uneven lines, shaky handwriting, and numbers that didn't seem to belong anywhere, would later become the backbone of the entire case against Linda. But at that moment, in the quiet of his dim bedroom, it was simply the only weapon he had left. A wounded man trying to hold on to the pieces of his life before someone else stole them entirely. The tension inside the house grew worse as summer arrived. Harold's conversations grew sharper, more pointed, as if clarity returned just long enough each day to spark fear in Linda. He questioned withdrawals. He asked about bills he didn't remember approving. He checked envelopes before she could intercept them. He even tried calling the bank himself, though the conversations exhausted him. Witnesses later reported hearing raised voices from the Merriman home, rare for Harold, who was known for patience bordering on saintly. One afternoon, a neighbor walking her dog overheard him say, in a trembling voice, "I need to see my statements, Linda, all of them." It was the closest he had ever come to accusing her directly, and that moment terrified her because by then, the fraud had grown far beyond anything she could explain. Over 15 years, the total had ballooned to more than $1.6 million. Money allegedly siphoned through dozens of small transfers, forged signatures, account consolidations, online marketplaces, and loans taken out in Harold's name. 15 years of deception, 15 years of a daughter quietly bleeding with her father dry while claiming to protect him. But the truth never stays buried forever. Something eventually shifts, an accident, a coincidence, a single misstep, and everything collapses. That misstep came the day Harold's new physician ordered a full review of his insurance claims and medical history following a medication error discovered during a scheduled checkup. A simple clerical audit, routine, standard, nothing unusual. But when the insurance coordinator contacted Harold directly to verify certain authorizations, she discovered something alarming. Several major claims had been denied for months. Policies that were supposed to be active were inexplicably canceled. Automatic payments had been rerouted or stopped altogether. And the listed contact email for the account wasn't Harold's. It belonged to Linda. When the coordinator gently asked him about it over the phone, Harold hesitated. Then, with quiet fear creeping into his voice, he said something she would later repeat in her report. "I don't think I'm the one handling those things anymore." It was the moment the first official red flag was documented. The coordinator filed a notice with her supervisor, who then contacted Adult Protective Services. Not because they knew what was happening yet, but because something wasn't adding up. Too many irregularities, too much confusion, too many signs Harold was being financially isolated. 2 weeks later, an APS investigator arrived at the Merriman home for a wellness visit. Linda nearly slammed the door in her face. She tried to explain the situation away. Claimed Harold was tired. Claimed he wasn't up for visitors. Claimed the financial concerns were simple misunderstandings caused by his declining memory. But the investigator, trained in subtle psychological cues, noticed the tension instantly. The way Linda hovered, the way Harold seemed afraid to speak freely, the way documents were kept out of sight. And then Harold did something unexpected, something quiet, something brave. He asked the investigator to sit with him alone in the living room. Linda resisted, but legally she couldn't stop him. When the door closed, the investigator noted how Harold's fragile composure shifted. His voice softened. His hands trembled. And after a long silence, he reached into the side table drawer and pulled out the small spiral notebook he had been hiding. "This is all I know," he whispered. "I think someone's been taking things from me. But I'm not sure how much." The investigator opened the notebook and felt her chest tighten. Dates, amounts, names of accounts, the same items flagged in the probate notice, the same discrepancies insurance had reported, the same patterns APS had been trained to identify. When she asked who Harold believed was responsible, he didn't answer immediately. He stared at the carpet, ashamed, torn, and shaken. Then he exhaled. "My daughter," he whispered. "Please, don't let her know I told you." It was the moment everything shifted, the moment the truth was finally exposed. Within days, APS coordinated with local law enforcement in the district attorney's office. Bank records were subpoenaed, digital transactions were traced, forged signatures were examined, and the deeper investigators dug, the darker the picture became. Linda had allegedly taken everything: savings, retirement funds, home equity, insurance payouts. She had liquidated assets, sold personal belongings, and opened lines of credit in Harold's name. She had even taken out a reverse mortgage on the family home, one Harold never agreed to. And all of it happened while she sat beside him each night, adjusting his pillows, preparing his meals, brushing crumbs from his shirt, like a caregiver devoted beyond measure. The emotional weight crushed Harold. Investigators said he wept during interviews, not from anger, but from disbelief, not from the loss of money, but from the shattering of love he thought was unbreakable. One officer described it as the kind of heartbreak we never forget, because Harold didn't curse Linda or scream or beg for punishment. He simply kept repeating, "Why would she do this? She's my daughter, my only daughter." When confronted, Linda initially denied everything. She blamed the bank, she blamed clerical errors, she blamed Harold's memory. But when investigators presented evidence, documents with her handwriting, transfers tied to her devices, purchases delivered to her address, her composure fractured. Her denial turned frantic. Her explanations grew disjointed. And then, in a moment investigators described as chilling, her voice dropped into a whisper, and she said, "I took care of him. I gave up everything. I deserve something back." It was the closest she ever came to admitting the truth. The district attorney charged her with multiple counts of felony elder financial abuse, grand theft, forgery, and exploitation of a dependent adult. The case moved swiftly. Prosecutors presented a timeline of manipulation stretching more than a decade and a half. Digital evidence cemented their claims. Financial experts testified that the total loss exceeded $1.6 million. The courtroom remained silent the day Harold testified. He took the stand, supported by a cane, breathing shallowly, hands shaking from both age and emotional strain. His voice was faint but steady. He spoke not with anger, but with devastation. "She was supposed to take care of me," he said quietly. "I trusted her. I trusted her with everything." Reporters later described the moment as emotionally suffocating. Several jurors were visibly shaken. Even the judge paused before proceeding with the next question. Linda avoided eye contact, staring instead at her hands resting motionless on the defense table. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all major counts, Linda was sentenced to 14 years in state prison. She showed no reaction as the sentence was read, offering neither apology nor acknowledgement. Harold, frail and exhausted, closed his eyes as though the cost of hearing the verdict was almost too much to bear. But the tragedy did not end in the courtroom. In the months following the trial, Harold's health declined sharply. Stress, emotional trauma, and shattered trust accelerating a deterioration doctors had hoped to slow. He passed away quietly in hospice care, surrounded not by family, but by volunteers who stepped in when there was no one left. In his final days, according to a hospice nurse, Harold spoke often about forgiveness, but he also asked a question that lingered long after his passing. Why wasn't I enough for her to protect? A question that chills anyone who hears this story, a question that exposes the darkest truth of all. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It grows from the very love we believe is unbreakable. Sometimes the truth is exposed far too late. When people hear about this case, they wonder the same things. What drives a daughter to destroy her own father's life? Is it desperation? Is it greed? Is it entitlement grown over years of resentment and sacrifice? Or is it something darker? Something hollow that grows when love is twisted into obligation and dependence becomes a kind of power. The Merriman story is a warning, a devastating reminder that betrayal often arrives quietly, disguised as devotion. That the most dangerous secrets are the ones buried inside families, the ones protected by silence, guilt, and fear of judgment. As we close this story tonight, consider this. Trust is fragile, loyalty is conditional, and love, when corrupted, can become a weapon sharper than anything forged by anger. Sometimes the darkest secrets are the ones we keep from the people we love. And in this case, the truth was exposed, but the damage was already done. If this story leaves you thinking about how far betrayal can go behind closed doors, share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else see a warning sign they've been ignoring. And if you want to support more investigations into family secrets, hidden crimes, and the quiet tragedies buried in everyday homes, staying connected with this channel makes a real difference. There are more stories waiting, stories the world needs to hear.